Hello, welcome to the November 28th, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply asking your questions in the live chat field. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in real time will soon be eclipsed, and it may not come off like a real-time answer, but we will go through all the questions chronologically. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could refrain from asking the question repeatedly, that would speed up the process so we get through more questions. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase you're running, whether it's 11, 12, 13, which level, is it Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, and which operating system, that information is helpful. We should have an index of all of the topics pinned to the top of the comments field. It may be coming tomorrow morning. I have kind of a rehearsal I need to go to tonight, so I may not get the index done tonight, so just a heads up that the index may be showing up tomorrow, but that will allow you to search for topics by particular timestamps, and that again will be pinned to the top. If you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to give Jan from Stockholm a special thanks for all of his works in creating that website. So there's over 29,000 different topics that you could search for and immediately jump to that particular area in the program. Also, we want to give special thanks to Agent K and Jazz Dude, who serve as moderators. They're not Steinberg employees. They just really do it to make it a better community. And we'll give special kudos to Jazz Dude for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Cubase community. Today is the last live stream of the month, so we should be doing our traditional Zoom meetup in about 2 hours. I'll just go ahead and post the link to the Zoom, so we'll go ahead and do that, and that's just a great way to kind of meet different people that are on the live stream. So we'll do that for about 2 hours after the live stream, so we'll go for about 2 hours and then migrate from there. So once again, just a quick note that the index may come tomorrow morning US East Coast time, just because I have an obligation tonight. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So Ness asks, hi Greg, can I use a hotkey to open and close a plugin from an insert? If you want to, it's not necessarily a hotkey, but you can do it with a generic remote. So if you say I want to open up insert slot 2, if you go to your project, let's say if we go to, your studio menu to studio setup, if we go to add a generic remote, so you'll just kind of come right over here and you'll see generic remote, and within the generic remote you could use a MIDI controller to say, okay, I want to take a particular controller, and you can learn the function, and we can say, let's go to mixer, and we'll say, okay, I want to go to selected, and then we could say, let's go to, insert, and we want to come over here and say edit. So now when we hit a MIDI message, we could open up insert 1 through 16 on whatever particular channels. So it's not a key command to do it, but you can trigger it from a generic remote. One other way of doing it, if you want to open up multiple tracks, if you hold down the Alt or Option plus the Shift key and click on the E, like the edit channel, that will open up all of the different settings. And if you just, I think it's just Shift and click there, that will close all of the plugin windows for a particular track. So if you want to open up I always want to open up insert 7, you could do it through the generic remote. All right, Roland Stuff asks, hi Greg, could you please explain the difference between the various track volume types and why they behave differently depending on track media type, especially MIDI files controlling external SX900? So yeah, thought of an SX900 in a while. But if we are dealing with virtual instruments, so say we add an instrument track, as soon as we add our instrument track, we will have a volume, and this volume is tied directly to a particular instrument. And this is going to be dealing not with MIDI CC volume 7, but what it's going to do is the audio characteristics of the audio output of the virtual instrument. So since we can control it, at this point we can now control that. Now when we add a MIDI track, such as one that would be needed to use with an external device like the SX900, we would add a MIDI track, and with this MIDI track we now see that we have our MIDI volume. So what this is going to do, this is MIDI CC7. Since the audio is not going to, since we're sending MIDI messages out to it, this is your MIDI volume. And so if it is configured as an external instrument, so we go to your audio connections, we go to external instruments, and we add your the Yamaha device here, that once we assign it, at that point we could treat it as a virtual instrument. But we could think of, for instrument tracks, the default volume will be kind of the audio output volume, and then for MIDI tracks this will be MIDI CC7, which is the MIDI continuous controller for volume. Just because the external instrument is not capable of running as into the audio stream unless it's configured as, again, an external instrument under the audio connections. All right, so we have Augie checking in from New York City. Glad you can make it today. All right, so we have Patrick asks, hello from Hungary. My older M Audio Axiom Pro keyboard has 8 faders. I'd like to set and control the mixer faders and to step forward 1 through 8 folders, then 9 through 16 with remote mapping. Thanks. Okay, so let's come over here to my MIDI remote. So let's say I want to take my 8 faders here of my Korg Nano Control, and I want to use those for channels 1 through 8 and then 9 through 16. So I'm going to create, so once we have the faders physically defined in our MIDI remote, we want to go to, let's say, our mapping page. So as soon as we come over here, we'll go to our mapping page. I'm going to create a new page here. So we'll call this Mix Banks. Okay, so I'll hit OK. And what I want to do is to now come over here. We're going to take a look at, so we have kind of our controller defined, but no parameters that are defined. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to move fader 1, and I'm going to, at this point, we'll just go to, I think we go to selected track. Let's get to mix console. So first thing I want to do is when you see so under the mix console area, we will go here to setup under our mixer bank zone. And here we want to say how many faders you have. So if you have 8 faders, you choose 8. If your control surface has 16 faders, you could choose 16. All right, and at this point, I want to set some mapping action. So I have a couple of buttons here. So I want to choose this as next mixer bank, this button. So I'm going to come here, apply the mapping, and I want this button here to be my previous mixer bank. Okay, so we have those defined. And at this point, we want to go through channels. And I will just come over here. So let's say we want to adjust. So I'm going to take the first one here, go to volume, double click, I go to fader 2, And we'll go to channel 2, select volume, close that. We'll come over to channel 3, move the fader, select volume. Let's go to channel 4. All right, I'll go to my 5th fader, select volume, channel 6, and we'll go to 7, select our volume. Now my project has more than 8 tracks, so here we will go to volume and select. Okay, so right now when we open up my mix console, just open it up here, and I'll make it smaller. All right, so I move my faders and we're controlling 1 through 8. Now I hit the bank button and we go to the next bank, and we can see that this little white line is now controlling, and now I could control 9 through 16, 17 through 24, bank to the previous bank, 9 through 16, and then 1 through 8. So that's all you have to do. So again, we want to get it set up so that when you're in the MIDI mapping, so as we go to open it up, set like 2 buttons for knobs. You want to go to the mix console, to the mixer bank zone, go to setup, define how many faders you physically have, and then go to your channels. Even though you map 1 through 8, when you hit the bank, it goes to channels 9 through 17, and then 9 through 16, 17 through 24, etc. It'll just kind of bank over to your different channels just like that. So that way one set of 8 faders can control multiple tracks in your project. All right. Okay, so we have a question from Matt Elder. Hi Greg, Matt from Canada. Last time I asked about shortcut Q-Link, the faders are not the problem, but I'm trying to solo multiple tracks with Q-Link shortcut. Is this a bug? Thanks. All right, so let's say we have multiple tracks set up here. So, if they're selected, one, you don't have to use Q-Link. You could just hit the S key for solo. And I think what a lot of people ran into is using kind of the Alt or Option plus Shift. And if you go to solo, that puts it into solo defeat. So if we want to do a Q-Link for the solo across these channels, and this would work the same way in the mix console, or I think what you need to do is hold down Alt or Option plus Shift. And then before you hit the S, I think if you release the Shift key, so I'm going to hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, and then I'm going to keep the Shift key held, and then just release the Alt or Option key, and then I could solo just those selected tracks. But a lot of times when you may not need Q-Link, because you could just take the tracks that are selected and just hit the S key. So again, if you want to do that, hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, then release the Shift key, or release the Alt or Option key, and then you could just solo just like that. But again, for soloing, you could just hit the letter S on selected tracks, and that will automatically solo. So let me know if that helps, Matt. All right, so we see James Bastini says, back in the day, there used to be a retrograde and inversion function. Why has it been removed? So I don't remember it being in, but let's say if we have MIDI notes here, if we go to MIDI, and if you go to functions, you could choose to mirror the event. So a lot of people would consider that kind of a retrograde function. There's also a reverse function, and this may not be as practical for a lot of people. So let's say if we come here, at this point we could choose to reverse, and this may cause so when you go to MIDI to overlaps to functions, you could reverse, and sometimes that didn't like that. All right, so but you could try those functions under the MIDI, and I think if you do the mirror function with a particular, just take a look at it, and I think that you could use the mirror function with a particular note in the logical editor as well. So, but try those functions, but I don't think Cubase ever officially had retrograde or reverse in it, but I could be mistaken. All right, see what the next question is. So Val asks, my question today is about the white line on MIDI inserts. Okay, so when we add, let's say, an instrument track or a MIDI track, and we go to our MIDI inserts, we can see this white line. So let's say if I come here, and we have a couple of different, we can see this white line. This line indicates which particular plugins are being recorded. So there used to be like a little record enable icon, but now we could just move this line to determine which particular plugins are recorded. So currently no plugins are being recorded. So if I wanted the MIDI echo to play but not record, I could move this line. You just kind of drag this line. So now the Apache will be recorded, but the MIDI echo won't be. So that just allows you to choose which particular MIDI plugins are actually being recorded. All right, great to see you, Val. You on from Vienna. All right, and we have Stefan from Sweden. We see Michael Marshall from Somerset, UK. Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. All right, we see David McKay from Nashville. All right, so and Dave asks, not exactly a Cubase question, does Cubase and Rendo have something similar to DP's chunks or Dorico flows, which allow you to score multiple scenes? So what a lot of people will do is, have, perhaps a project set up. It's not the same exact scenario, but let's just say if I take a simple, just find something that will, okay, so if, what a lot of people will utilize is kind of track versions for this, because you could actually tie the track versions into with the video tracks themselves. So let's say I like, I have, so now if I wanted to come over here, I could select all my particular tracks, and then we could just say, okay, I want to do a new version, and then all of our different functions will be set here. So let's say, okay, I'm at so if I want to, so let's say I'll copy all of these different events. So we can say, okay, I want to now come here. We'll select all, copy, and we'll say now we'll just duplicate this version and say, now if I want to take all these events and let's say this is different media, and we could have different track versions for video as well, you can now just come over here and switch between different track versions if you wanted to. But so a lot of people use track versions kind of for that particular style of workflow. So you could have multiple, you could keep everything exactly the same, and then you could have different track versions for tempo, for video as well. Great to see you on, Dave. All right, so David Griffiths is asking from Chile, Wales, if anyone's using mVoice to get top lines together for singers. They had a few crashes with Cubase 13 Artist recently, so not sure. Okay, so Patrick asked, hi Greg, I found a bug. I can't hit the enter key in the Control F search field anymore if I have the divide track list featured enabled. All right, so let's say I'll just try it here. So let's say I have no divide track list and I want to go to oboe. So let's say if I come here, let's just say, okay, I'm gonna go to harp. All right, so let me go ahead and do a divide track list. Okay, so now when I do, so say I just select harp, it'll, so it still seems to work, but let's see if we need to be, if I come here, so it still seems like it's working here. So let's say, okay, I want to go to violin 2. Let's say if I want to go to the grand. So you might have to switch. So you could just, it seems like that's kind of working for me, but let me know if I'm doing it something differently than you are. All right, wonderful to see Jan from Cubase Index on, and Benny, both from Sweden. All right, so we have Steve Clark checking in. I don't know if it's Steve Clark who's used to work at Washington Music or not, but thanks for joining us. All right, we have West Star Media on. All right, so Dallas LaRue asks, on transport start mode, I can't just select return to start position on stop by itself. Something else is always selected with it. All right, so let's come over here. So we go to our, we'll take a look at our transport start modes. All right, so let's say, so it's always going to start from the cursor position, and we could just have that turned on. So let's say I want to start from measure 145, we hit play. So now when I hit stop, it goes right back to that position. With that disabled and unchecked, so we go to transport, start mode, and once that's turned off, so even though two things are selected, so when I hit stop, it'll stop right there and continue on. So even though that the start mode is enabled, the return to start position won't take effect. So, it's going to play from the cursor position, but what it does on the stop is actually dictated by if this is activated or not. So the functionality is the same. All right, we see Capital Razor checking in from Hamilton, Ontario. Thanks for joining us today. Wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. Sorry I didn't get to say hi to him earlier. All right. We see from Sola Uriel. I think it may be asking if we're doing this in French. I'm an ignorant American that only speaks English. So, but maybe you could ask your question and type it in Google Translate. I know people do that. All right, and we have Miha Vasil just saying hello. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we have Patrick asks, can MediaBay have XML file support added? I like using track archives, but I have to revert back to using project files instead, so they show up inside of MediaBay. I'll pass it on, but sometimes, XML files are used for, many different types of file formats. So if you have like an XML file for other programs, it may not make sense to have them show up directly as an XML file, because that could be you could be seeing XML files for lots of other programs and lots of other functions, so that could be why. All right, so we see Real Raven 2000 says greetings from Ireland. Hope you're all having a great day. So I think Real Raven 2000 used to be on the very first live stream, so great to see you back. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so Daniela Tocan says, hello, the Steinberg offers this year are disappointing. I realize that Steinberg does promotions almost every month, so there's lots, so probably if you wanted to get Absolute 6, or if you wanted to get, VST Live or Spectral Layers, they're probably pretty exciting. All right, so Miha just asks, there's a Zoom meeting tonight, so yes, there is Zoom. So we'll be doing that starting in about an hour and a half. We posted the link. All right, so Benny asks, if I have a live recorded piano and want to change to a studio recorded piano but different tempo, is it possible to get the same tempo, Cubase 13? So if you know kind of what your tempo is, so it can be done. Sometimes it may not make total sense musically, but it can be done. So let's show you really quickly. And I don't think I have a good example, but we'll show you kind of the mechanics of it. All right, so once you've done kind of a tempo detection, let's say I just have a piano recording here. So I'm going to just do a tempo detection of the file. So we'll come over here and go to project, and we'll do our tempo detection. Listen to it. So once we've done the tempo detection, we can then apply, if we want to take this tempo information from this project, we could go to audio menu, to advanced, and we could say set definition from tempo, and we could save it in a project or write it into the audio file. So once we've done that, we can now take the tempo that's been detected of another file, drop that in, and once we figured out kind of what the tempo detection of each file is and embedded it into the file, if I had another piano recording, as I drop it in and enable musical mode, that the other piano recording would follow the tempo of this particular recording. So that would be what you'd have to do. So do the tempo detection, and for each file, come over and go to your audio menu and go to advanced and do the set definition from tempo, and then you could embed the tempo changes into each file, and then it'll, if they're both set to musical mode, it will at that point just follow the project tempo. All right, so Steve Clark just says, you still play bass? So yep, I still do. Just played on 2 tracks for Hot Mess for Christmas songs, and I'm doing my first orchestral gig in about a week and a half in 30 some years. So. All right, so Patrick asks, can arrow key support be added for search fields like plugin list or Control F search window? I'd like to be able to navigate through the list using my keyboard's arrow keys. All right, so let's say if we come over here, let's say if we go to add a plugin, so let's say if let's add an effect track. So as soon as we come here, so let's say if we just go to reverb, yeah, so I will pass that along as a way to kind of quickly navigate. I know sometimes, let's say if we are, let's say if we go to our media here, that we just see if there's a modifier key. So let's say if we go to Pad Shop now, and we just want to scroll through presets. So once you're in kind of the presets, you could use the arrow keys. And then I think, like if you're in, let's say if we go to Media Bay, to behaviors, a little different. So let's say we come here to VST Sound. So say as we navigate here, and let's just see if there's, I thought there was a keyboard shortcut to go back. So you use kind of page up. Okay, I'll make sure to pass that along as a feature suggestion. All right, so we see from Real Raven 2000, any news on supporting Numlock equals off in Cubase 13? It means to use the number block on a full IBM keyboard for navigation, home, cursor keys, etc. in any text. I will check it out. I assume it's going to be, so I know that like on my Mac OS, and I'm running Mac, so that may not be so helpful, but if I'm here, like let's say I'm in the lower zone, I could use my page up, page down I was using to switch between different zones. But I could try it on Windows. Let me know if it's specifically on Windows machine that you're running on, and you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, we see Benny won't be able to join the Zoom tonight. All right, so we see Patrick. Is it possible to have pinch to zoom support added for us trackpad and MacBook users? Let me see if I could open up my MacBook. I have it kind of in clamshell mode. Let me see. This may mess up the particular screen. So I'll just try it real quick here. Hang on. I know that if you use kind of like the 2 fingers, it seems like you can, with the modifier keys, have that function as a scroll wheel, but I'll check it when I'm kind of not online, so that I have a little more chance to do it while you guys could see it. But if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so David Griffiths asks, hi, sorry if it's asked before today. I can't route an instrument track to an audio track yet. It was a new feature advertised in Cubase 13. I have Cubase 13 Artist, PCI 9, so I'm not sure if it's in Artist version. I know that there's initially there's an error that listed it in the Elements, Artist, and Pro, so I'm not sure if it's just a Pro version, so it may have been updated initially. So let me just give it a try here real quick. I'll just go to this. So the change that happened in Cubase 12 was if we had a piano, we would, in previous versions, we would have to route that piano to a group to record that audio. So now what we could do is, as we add an audio track, we could just choose the instrument itself. So we can say, okay, I just want to take my Halion Sonic 1, I think, and now we could route the particular instrument directly into the audio. So as it plays, I could just place that into record. So I know that the very first, on the very first iteration, there may have been an error stating that was in Elements, or but I thought it might have been in Artist, but it might have been listed in error. So let me know if it still says that on the website. But that was kind of the new deal, that if you go to add an audio track, that you could just, it may be under an Artist version. I don't think it's in, I haven't tested it in Artist, but check if it's under Connect to Bus, and then you can see track or rack instruments, and then you could set an instrument directly as an output, or an instrument's output as input for an audio track. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped. All right, Mike Reinhardt asks, hi Greg, could you explain how to set up Acid Pro 10 as a multi-track Rewire device and be able to use Cubase plugins on the audio coming from Acid? So since I think it's Cubase 11, I think was the last version that had Rewire support, because Rewire's been dropped from its developer. It's kind of been abandoned by Reason Studios, so it's no longer supported. It won't work in, later processors and operating systems. So you would need Cubase 11 to do that, because the functionality was discontinued by its creator. All right, so we see John Costigan says, hi Greg, Cubase 12, Windows 10, I'm still having user errors while doing multiple export of 20 songs in Cubase 12. 13 looks improved. Anything obvious to check? So, one of the things to make sure is, that you could have, so let's say if I come and let's add a marker track here. So if I wanted to come and let's just go ahead and add some cycle markers here. So I'll just hit the letter P, add cycle marker for each of these events, and we could make a macro to speed up this process. But okay, so let's say we have our cycle markers here. So make sure it could be, make sure that your cycle marker track is the active marker track. So, and now when we go to export audio mixdown, because you have multiple tracks, you have 10 marker tracks, but one can be active at once. So make sure that your cycle marker track is the one that's activated. And then when you go to export audio mixdown, make sure that you have the cycle markers listed here, and then you could just choose the cycle markers like so. So make sure that, if you have multiple marker tracks, that the marker track with your cycle marker has the little checkbox here to make sure that that is activated. So we see Patrick says, I think I've asked about the routing folder once already, but it'd be really nice if you could give the development team a heads up about it now that other programs have added them as well. So, realize that, all you have to do if you have a number of tracks that you want to do a routing folder, there is a macro to do this, but realize that our folders can contain significantly more, probably can contain more data that doesn't output audio. So why would you have a video track going to an audio out, or an arranger track, or a chord track? So, but you could have a macro, and I have a really large list of macros, but just go to selected tracks to new folder and add group channel. And then you could just come over here. All those tracks were now added to a folder and a group channel. But again, realize that folder tracks can contain lots of different elements that automatically do not pass audio. So, but I know that the team, is aware of people wanting that. So. All right, so Robbie Bowling says, although I'm still running Cubase 12, I still have Cubase 11 on my computer. Do I still need to e-license? So if you want to run version 11 and earlier, you need the e-licenser. With Cubase 12 and 13, you do not need the e-licenser. Okay, so we see Dallas LaRue says, I want to deal for Absolute 6, the crossgrade from Groove Agent 5. I have Groove Agent SE 5. Is it the same thing? Can you explain all that is in Absolute 6? So Groove Agent 5 and Groove Agent SE 5 comes with Cubase. And then there's a Groove Agent 5, which has more kits, the percussion agent, and more capabilities, and that's sold separately. So I don't think that you could do a cross grade from something that you necessarily did not purchase. So if you had Groove Agent 5 that you purchased separately, think of SE as the starter edition. But let's take a look at what's in Absolute 6. It's a great deal. So let's say, and I think it's still in the Cyber Weeks promotion. All right, so you get the Hallion 7, you get the FM Lab, Retrolog 2, Sounds of Soul, Pad Shop 2, Polarity, Skylab, Anima, Hot Brass, the organ, the Model C organ, the Amped Electro piano, the Eagle, the Grand 3, which is 30 gigabytes of piano, the Raven. You get Groove Agent 5, Future Past Perfect, Backbone, Prime Cuts, World Percussion, B-Box, Rock Essentials. You get Tails for guitars, the electric bass, World Instruments, Dark Planet, Studio String, Halian Symphonic Orchestra. You get Choir, the Olympus Choir Micro. So these are all of the different instruments that come in Absolute 6. So it's a great deal to get currently with the 50% off promotion. But I don't think you'll be able to upgrade to SE5 since that comes with Cubase. If you'd purchased a version of just regular Groove Agent 5, then I think you could use that. But they are different. All right, so we have Music All Day checking in from Ypsilanti, Michigan. We have Nick checking in from Essex in the UK. All right, so we have the soundbar. Hi, I'm using plugins on different tracks that introduce latency plus increase the volume. Is there an elegant way to bypass all effects and also bring the volume down at the same time / undo that with one key? So, you could choose to, if you hit the constrained delay compensation, that could bypass latent plugins. But, probably for each track, if you just come over, let's say if you have a number of inserts. Let's see if it's here. So let's say we have a number of inserts on this particular track. All you'd have to do for your inserts is you could just bypass the inserts just right there, and you could choose to also have like a project logical editor. So let's say I want to take on the selected track, so we'll say transform for our condition. Let's go to media type or container type is equal to track. We will make sure that the property is that the track is set to is selected, and we will come over here. Let's go to track operation. We want to go to our insert to bypass and then click enable, so you can save that as a preset. So we see all my inserts here. So as I just hit apply, all the inserts on the selected track will be bypassed. So again, if you want to make a project logical editor, you could assign a keyboard shortcut to that preset or fire it off from a MIDI remote device. Choose transform. We want to say container type is equal to tracks, and the tracks are selected, and then under track operation, insert bypass, enable. You could also choose to toggle. So if you wanted to just come right over there and turn them all on and off with the same command, you could do that as well. All right, so Patrick asked, would it be possible to have Groove Agent samples get copied into the project pool, or alternatively have multi-sample support inside the sampler track? So the sampler track is kind of intended to be very simple, single sample. But if you have a number of samples that you want in Groove Agent, what I know a lot of people do to kind of simplify all the routing is they'll just add an audio track, and we'll just call this samples for Groove Agent, and then they will come over. Let's say we go to different drum samples. So let's say these are drum samples. You could just simply take them all onto one track, and if you wanted to, at this point, if we have an instance of Groove Agent open, So hit the right button this time. So I'll just come here. I could just take these particular samples. So I'll put them on. And then we could have all of the samples mapped out. The samples are all now stored in your audio pool as well. You could just have this particular track routed to nowhere so that it doesn't sound. So you could just choose no bus and just use a particular track, and then that way all of the media for Groove Agent is now automatically copied directly into the pool and will be saved with the project. And if you don't want to see it once you have it done because you think it's in the way, so again, you can mute the track, set it to no output, but just go to the visibility and you can say, okay, I just don't want to see that track. And that way all the media is in your project saved for you. See, Patrick just says, I think the lack of this feature is clearly shown by the Cubase 13 demo tracks that have missing files inside Groove Agent when using it for drum programming. So yeah, I mean, it could depend on, maybe some of them were using other samples as well. So, but you could definitely have all the samples, and you could also just take your Groove Agent, come right over here. If you don't want to use the track method, you could say, okay, I want to take all these samples here, and again, I'll drag them to the pads and just say export kit with samples and choose to place it into your project folder. So, and then all the audio files will be in your project folder as well. So all right, so we see Alex Morgan. Hi, Greg. Could you show us how to create a Media Bay volume and import it to a new computer so all of our folders and ratings show up? Would be massively helpful. Thank you. So it's really just, I think if we go to I think it's your volume.db file, and then all you'd have to do is copy that. So let me see if go to my Finder. So you may have to, if you're on Mac OS, go to Library, and then I think it's under Preferences, and let's come over here to Cubase 13. And then you just copy this file to your new computer. And I think that would just take all of your ratings and migrate that over for you. So it's just, I think it's just the MediaBay3.db file, but you could take these over. Just take your media files and copy those to your new computer. I think that will do the trick for you. All right, George Robinson asks, hey Greg, quick question please. Is there a way to export an audio file as WAV or MP3 quickly? For example, in other programs you could export a single file in a desired format. So really all you have to do is, when you go to export, you could, you go to your export audio mix down, you could just select one particular file. And at this point, if you want to, we could choose your different formats. If you want it to be WAV or an MP3, so you could do it on individual tracks. If you had a number of files, let's say I want to take all of these files here, we could also choose to export. So go to export. See, I must have something else selected. But there is also the export selected events. So as soon as I come here, and you could just simply export a single event, or export, multiple events just right there. So this would do it as a WAV file, but if you need to do it as an MP3, just go in, whatever event that you have, what events you have selected, or if you want to go on the tracks, you can now just come over here and do your export audio mix down. Here you could choose different, if you want it to be WAV or MP3. If you had a bunch of edits that you wanted to consolidate, let's say, okay, I've done all sorts of, weird fades on all these clips. I could also select the events. If we go to render in place, we can go to our render settings. And here you could choose different bit depths if you want. I think it's still going to be WAV files. So we could just say render in place, and we could choose to, let me just not have this record enabled. And again, we go to render in place. We could do it as one event, as block events, or we could do it as separate events. So we could just come here, and all of our edits have now been kind of applied. If we wanted those events to last until the next event starts, we go to edit, to render in settings, and here we could choose block events. So all sorts of different ways to export the different audio files, George. Thanks for joining us today in the live stream. All right, so we see Hank Homa Omas ask how to set the output channel to the right zone of mixer console as default. Is making a template the only way? So we realize that your channel settings are going to be, if we want this always to be anchored to the right, this is going to be on a project level. So if you want that to show up in every project, start off with a template, because if we had let's say you had 4 outputs or no outputs for some reason, every project may have different settings and different tracks. So at that point, if you want it to go to the visibility zones and say, okay, I want my output channels, if you want that for every single project, just simply start off with a template, because every project may have different inputs, outputs, and tracks. So like the mix console settings are going to be stored within a particular project. So if you always want that to be anchored, just simply save it as a template and start from the template. Okay, so we see Patrick asks, what are the advantages of creating a volume database? I have my sample collection stored on OneDrive, and it works great for syncing my sound library and sample ratings between different devices. So you could do that, but if you wanted it to be stored locally, a lot of people may not want their entire sample library in the cloud. The speed of auditioning samples could vary. It's kind of out of your local control a lot of times, depending upon your internet provider, how many people could be on your system. If someone in your household is watching, a streaming service, that may affect the speed. So a lot of people choose to have their, Media Bay database local to their machine, so that they know it's going to be consistent and work very fast. So if storing it in the cloud is working great for you, then that works very well. But for a lot of people, there could be other factors that could slow down the process in auditioning different loops and libraries. All right. So we see the Ninja Scared asks, hey, have we thought about combining Beat Designer into Drum Editor, just like how you combine the chord pads? So, the chord pads are always, that functionality was always in the chord pads. But, if you want like the Beat Designer here, what a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that you could, just very easily come and let's say if we jump here, we could see the lower zone has the drum editor, which could give you a tremendous amount of flexibility. So you could route to multiple devices if you needed to, but you could have the drum editor to program beats in the lower zone very easily. So let me know if there's something that you need in the Beat Designer that's not available in the drum editor in the lower zone already. All right, so Patrick asks, what is the best way to strum MIDI data? Some DAWs have a function built in that lets the user define an amount of strumming they want to apply across all selected notes. So I've seen people create, different, project logic or logical editor presets for that. But let's say if we go to a chord track, we'll show you just something that you could do. So let's come over here. I'll go to my project menu quickly and I'll just populate some chords. So kind of an easy way to do it is just to, if you grab the trim tool and hold down like the Alt or Option key, is you could just kind of set the particular, if you wanted to offset the starts of events, you could just kind of set that as you want. So try the trim tool, holding down the Alt or Option key. All right, John Koskian says, don't forget that delightful like button. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and post the the Zoom meetup info again. We'll be starting in about an hour. All right, so we see from Justin Hampton, says, Patrick, I was thinking the same thing. Would love to have a way to humanize chord pad. Usually I have to drag MIDI into Easy Piano or something. So, if you wanted to, there are different options. So let's say if we come here to our chord track. So let's go to our chord pads here. So, lock chords, but there's also all sorts of different patterns that you could have. So if you just, even if you wanted to come over here, you could drag and drop your own. So, but if you wanted to come over here and go to different piano sequences, you could just come over here and say, okay, I just want to do like Latin piano. And if you had a particular pattern that you really liked, all you have to do is just drag that, and now that could be the basis for the pattern right there. So if you're looking for a way to customize or humanize the chord pads, you could just do it right there. All right, so we just see from Patrick, what is your favorite macro you've created? I need some inspiration for a few macros I could make. So one that one of my an early hit macro that I had was probably utilizing kind of the minimize breaths, and this is kind of been simplified in Cubase 13. So let's say like this is a vocal performance and these were breaths in the middle here, and we wanted to just minimize the breaths. We don't necessarily want to cut them out or use a noise gate because that could sound very unnatural. So let me see if I still have the macro here. Let's get to key commands. I'll just all right. So there used to be kind of there's a lot of stuff that would have to be done. So I'll just come over here and we'll make a new macro just to show this. So what I want to do is, let's say these are breaths that I wanted to select with the range tool and just bring their levels down significantly. So to do this, we'll make a new macro. All right, and first thing I want to do is I'm going to use the range selection tool, and then I'm going to hit we'll just say, I'm going to select the key command, Shift X, so we're going to split. So I'm going to add that command. Let's also switch to the object selection tool, because this now will keep the material selected. So we'll come over here, add command. I want to now choose to decrement. I spelled decrement correctly. So we'll decrement event volume, and I'll just do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that would be 1 dB at a time. And then I want to select none, add the command, and let's go back to our range tool. So we come here. All right, so now this should, when I do this, I'm going to select a range. It will split the range, switch to the object selection tool, which will leave the event selected. It's going to decrease the volume, select no events, then go back to the range selection tool. So if I wanted to execute this, I can now just select, like, let's say those are my breaths in the audio file. And now I could come here and say, oh, there's some more breaths. I want to get these breaths out. So you could just kind of execute the macro like that. So that's a handy macro, stuff like that to do. So, but macros could be, I usually kind of look for, like people will ask me, oh, I can't do this, and can we do it in a macro? So. All right, wonderful to see Grant Nicholas on from Baltimore. Hope you're doing well, buddy. All right, so we see from Couscous, hey, hello, Greg. How can I randomize the position of selected MIDI notes using the project logical editor? So you would use probably the logical editor. So let's say I have some selected notes. All right, so I'll just kind of, all right, so at this point I want to just select some particular notes here, not all notes. So let's say these are all kind of painted in as 16th notes. So if we want to randomize the position, what you could do is get to the MIDI logical editor. The project logical editor is not really going to randomize MIDI notes, but the MIDI logical editor can do that. So we want to choose transform, and we're going to take type is equal to notes, and we want to take our position, and we want to set relative random values, and then we could say between minus 50 and 50. So now when we come over here, we could just change the relative values just for MIDI notes. So you could just do it just like that. So, and also if you wanted to treat it globally, you could go to like a MIDI, if you go to like a MIDI insert here, you know, we could just go over here to transform, and you could kind of do the same types of functions right there. Okay, so you see from Patrick, you made a mistake with the divide track list bug when you had it selected and type track name. Notice how it doesn't actually select the search result and doesn't jump there either. All right, so let's give it a shot. Sorry about that, Patrick. Just do a new project here. Okay, so say I take tracks 1 through 4, and we'll move them up here. Okay. All right, so let's come here. Let's look for we'll say 7. Okay, now let's look for 3. So it looks like that kind of worked for me there. So let's go to, again, Control or Command F. I want to type in 5. Select it. I type in Audio 02. And select it and switch between the 2 different zones. So let me know, Patrick, if I'm doing something differently. Okay, so inactive user asks, hi Greg, how are you today? So I'm doing great. Good to be back working after the holiday. US, how can I use the detect silence feature on vocals and use the auto fades? Best regards. All right, so let's say we had, all right, so I'll just take some different vocals here. And okay, so I'm going to put these all into one track. And now I'm going to, I'll just put a little space between them. So okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and bounce these particular functions. Okay, so what I want to do now is do a detect silence. So where we added our 3 seconds of silence, I'm going to go to my audio menu, and we will just go to advanced, and we'll choose detect silence. So at this point, we'll analyze and process. So we've now split the different parts. And then kind of the second part of the question was about using the auto fade. So let's say as we're listening to it, we'll come over here. And I'll unmute it.
It's gotta be love. This is how you got me crazy, love.
So if we activate the auto fades here, so we don't actually see kind of the auto fades being applied, but what this will do is put a short fade in of 10 milliseconds and fade out every time that the audio is played, so we don't have any abrupt endings or starts.
So high I'm lifted. It's gotta be love. This is how you got me crazy, love.
So again, you're not going to see these fades visually, but they're applied on playback so that you don't have to go through and do lots of editing. All right. All right, so Clay Lahat, also regarding the add track, for example, adding a VSTI and even a VST plugin as an insert, it'd be nice if the cursor would start in the edit field for the dropdown so I could just start typing. Okay, so let's say I just come here, let's add, let's say, instrument track. Or let me just... All right, let me just right click here and we'll just add instrument track. So you want the, okay, I could pass that along as kind of a feature suggestion. Sometimes people don't want that, but I could see where it could make sense. But, now as we type, you could just kind of type in your particular. So let's see if it's just there. So I could pass that along as a feature request. Thanks for letting us know, Clay. All right, so Bob asks, hi Greg, can you show how to add loop points to multiple files on Cubase or Wavelab? So I think, Wavelab could do it. Let's take a look and see if we could do it in the montage. Generally loop points could be set for, like a loop point in one file may not work in another file, but let's see if we could apply it here in Wavelab, and we could do it in montage. But I think a lot of the time what happens is that people will, different audio, having loop points across the same audio file. So let's say if I move this here and move this down, if we wanted to put loop points. So let's say if I select that, and we'll come over. So we could do it for the montage. I'm not sure if it's applied to the audio file itself. So let me know if you need to make the same exact loop points inserted into multiple files. I think a lot of times people, if you're doing like sample loops, each file would be different, or if you need like loops to be inserted across multiple selected tracks like that, and what kind of like a use case for that, where it's kind of treated globally for your loop there. So if you could specify that, hopefully we get to it before the live stream ends. Okay, so Jay Faceless asks, hi Greg, how are you doing? I would like to know if I have VST Live, I still need Cubase to perform, thanks. So VST Live will work as a separate application, so it works independently of Cubase, but you can take your Cubase project, export it as a media project into VST Live, but they work completely independently. Hi Greg, my name is Milos from Norway. I have Cubase Pro 12. I would like to upgrade to Cubase 13 Pro and have the East-West Opus plugin. Will there be any problems? 13 with that. I have MacBook Pro, so probably if it's running in your Cubase 12, I wouldn't anticipate any problems going, having it work in Cubase 13. All right, let me just jump back. My chat field jumped at me. All right, so you see Patrick asks, is there a way to decrease the density of contrast on a grid compared to some other DAWs? I feel like I sometimes have trouble to quickly and intuitively see the downbeat. So what you can do is, if we go to, I think it's, if you come over here, let's go to preferences. So if you want to see like the downbeat easier, let's come over. I think we go to our grid lines. So let's just move our grid lines, make it more white, and hit apply. And let me just see if that's, maybe get the wrong grid lines. So let's go to the project. So we'll go to our grid lines here. Move your grid lines up, hit apply. And then I think that the downbeat is pretty clear. So again, go to your preferences, to color schemes, and then you can see the grid lines you could adjust there. All right, wonderful to see Alexander Plasko. Glad you could join us. Okay, so we see Music All Day says, hey Greg, what is the Zoom link? So usually the last live stream of the month, we get together kind of in a Zoom social meetup, and everyone gets to kind of chat and meet each other. So it's a lot of fun, great topics of conversation. All right, so Clay asks, question, scoring to video, how to deal with changing the tempo during an audio clip without misaligning with the video, everything after. So if you have a video file, so let's say, we'll just do a new project here. Okay, so let's say we have our video file here. I'll just go ahead and all right, so let's say if we have like an audio loop and we drag this into our project, okay. So if we change the tempo, you want to make sure that if you don't want the events to change, just make sure that the track itself is in linear mode. So as we adjust, and we also want to make sure if it's an audio event, that musical mode is turned off. So now as I would adjust our tempo, so let's say if I go to my warp grid mode, that I could adjust the tempo, and we see that the actual events here are not changing. So we could adjust the tempo without moving the events, but if this is set to musical mode, when I change the tempo and let's say it's set, like our audio event is set to musical mode, now the audio will change. But if it's not set to musical mode, we could come over and adjust the tempo without the audio ever changing. So come over here and make sure that the events aren't on musical mode. If we have MIDI data, so let's say if I come here and we had a MIDI track or instrument track, so let's say this note, I'll just put in some quarter notes here. All right, so now if this MIDI track is set to musical mode, as I adjust the tempo, the events, so we come here, we can see that our tempo, again, you want to just make sure that these are set to linear mode, and then once a track is set to linear mode, any change that you make in tempo won't make the events will stay in the same position. All right, wonderful to see Bruce Bruton. And hoping everyone's doing well. All right. So Patrick asks, is it possible to create a project logical editor preset that moves tracks into already existing folders instead of creating new ones? I'm working on a project that will automatically organize my projects for me. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so let's say I want to put these into okay, and I'll just add a couple of audio tracks here. Okay, so let's see if okay, so let's see if we could do this. I may have to play around with this a little more time, but Okay, so let's see if we can do select. We'll do transform. Say media type is equal to, or our container type is equal to folder track, and let's say that it is property is set to is selected. Okay. All right, so say it's not set to selected, and what we want to do is okay, so let's come over, let me go to my visibility. And let's see if we could come over and have this So I may have to play around with this a little bit more, Patrick, but I can see if I can have it for Friday's live stream. But I was just seeing if we could select the tracks if they're not in a folder. Yeah, I'll play around with it and see if I could get it, but I think if we take like a couple of steps that we might be able to have the multiple folders. So say if we go back to this one, if we have our folders, let's I don't think that there's a function for send to folder to a particular folder if you have multiple folders. But I'll play around with it some more, Patrick. If you want to send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, Eric McCann asks, hi Greg, new Windows 13 on Windows 10. In the pre-section of the mixer, the pre-gain doesn't work with mouse scroll wheel on my system. So there is a preference. So if you want it to come over, let's say we go to our audio and we have the pre-gain and you wanted to adjust, come over to, because there's lots of people complaining about their mouse scroll wheel changing parameters. So if we go to editing, to project and mix console, you can say disable mouse wheel for parameter change, uncheck that, hit apply, hit OK. And now you could just come to your pre-section and let's go to the gain and use your mouse scroll wheel. All right, so we see Ted Springman asks, hi Greg, is it possible for the attack of a compressor plugin or offline function to react at speeds down to the sample level? I noticed mini mogs go 0 to full volume within the sample, but not most. So it could depend on how fast the compressor is. So, you know, certain compressors can do that, can be down to the sample level. So. All right, so we see, hey Greg, are there any changes in Cubase 13 in regard to Dolby Atmos? So the Dolby Atmos function remains the same. All right, Patrick asks, is it possible to run two DAWs at the same time, linking their BPM and playback position? So it could really depend on your audio interface if they're both using the same audio interface, but you could send MIDI timecode that doesn't necessarily send the beats per minute, but that will send a playback position. But if you wanted to do with audio, you would need to make sure that both of the programs are going to synchronize to the same audio clock. So you can do it for MIDI quite easily, but once you start integrating audio, then the two programs will probably go out of sync unless you have clocking set up between the two different programs. All right. See, Fabrizio says, hey Greg, thanks for these sessions, they're very instructive. All right, so we see, hey, when I'm unmixing, question from Joseph, when I'm unmixing vocals of old recordings in spectral layers to turn vocals into VariAudio, is there a way to tune both stereo channels together so it won't phase? Thank you. So, you know, you could do stereo files already in VariAudio without phase. So let's say if we just come over here to our loops, so let's say we'll take a vocal file here. And this vocal file is in stereo. So when we come to do our VariAudio, that we could now just, as we go to VariAudio, so it could work in stereo files. It just needs to be monophonic. So you could definitely do your tuning of stereo files. All right, so the soundbar says constrained delay compensation works just fine for me, but I want to create a macro that activates that compensation and brings the volume down to a certain level at the same time. So, you know, how do you know that it's always going to be the same level? So is the question. So you could do a macro to do that, but, you know, if you've done... if you've done within 4 plugins, you've added 6 dB of gain, is that macro, if you say go down 6 dB, is that applicable only to that track or to all tracks? So if you could answer that for me, that would be great. All right, so you see from Patrick, loading the plugin presets takes quite a long time for me in Cubase. I'm able to use my plugin presets in Studio One as well, and the preset list loads instantaneously there. So I haven't really had any problems. I'm not sure like how you're loading it, or if you have all your presets on a library on a OneDrive. But let's come over here. So let's say I just want to come over to my delay, and then when I click, I want to go to a different plugin, and we could just, so I think that's pretty fast and responsive. So let's come to Studio EQ. I just click there. So that's how it works on my systems. All right, I know we had a bunch of questions that were sent in advance. Let's get to those. I'm going to post the Zoom link one more time. Sorry, all right, I see. Just a quick question. Can you show us how to download the official trial for Cubase 13? Having a hard time navigating where to find a trial version on a website. So there isn't a current trial version yet. All right, so let's get to some of the questions that were mailed in. And just come over here. I think I had a project set up for them. Okay, so we had a question, how to activate the monitor on selected track and remove it from other tracks. Okay, so if we had our monitor selected on these particular tracks, but I had this track selected and I wanted to remove that. So I made a project logical editor. So I did kind of a two-step project logical editor for this. So let's go to setup. Keyboard on the right computer. Okay, so the first thing I did was to just do a transform. I want to say my container type is equal to track, and the track operation monitor is to disable monitor on all the tracks. So again, what we want to do is to take the selected track, enable monitoring on that, and not on other tracks. So now so we do that first, and then I came and for our pre-process, we're going to choose that project logical editor preset. We're going to choose transform. Then we're going to say our container type is equal to track, and the track is selected. And we want to say the track operation monitor enable. So right now we see that these particular tracks have monitoring turned on. This could be for MIDI or audio, but I want only this track to have the monitoring turned on. So now when I run this project logical editor, so again, we turn off all the monitors before we do this. And then we're going to turn the monitoring on for the selected track. So come over here, hit apply, and then only the selected track is monitored, and the monitor status of all the other tracks have been eradicated. Okay, so another question mailed in. I have 3 questions. How can I start Cubase? So, when you just start Cubase, you just kind of double click on the icon after installing Cubase, and then that will load a program. Second question, if I recorded 16 channels in Yamaha sequencer audio recording, how can I transfer Cubase each channel and a different track on each channel has its own track? So there's probably a good chance that your MIDI, that you haven't recorded audio in your Yamaha device, that you've recorded just MIDI. So what you can do is you know, if you have the MIDI file, you can just take the MIDI file, and if you have like MIDI information on channels 1 through 16, at that point you can put it onto a MIDI channel any. And then from your MIDI channel any, if we just come over and let's say we have some different notes here, and some of these notes are on different MIDI channels, that what we could do is, if you go to MIDI and we'll choose to dissolve part, at that point you could click on separate pitches, or we'll choose separate channels, I'm sorry. Then hit process, and what that will do is that will split MIDI channel 1 and MIDI channel 2 to their own tracks. All right, third question. So it says, if this process is done, how can I make mixing, or how can I separate each track as wave format? Okay, so if you have, you know, with an external device, what you're going to have to do is you could send the MIDI out to the device. The device is going to generate the tone. That's why often synthesizers are called tone generators. And we want to then take the audio output to audio input in Cubase and then record it. So if you have one stereo out, you could do one track at a time, and that's just a limitation of the hardware device. But you'd physically probably have to patch the audio output from your instrument to inputs of your interface and then record. All right, so we had a question from Vishnu. It says, last week I was working on a song project and dragged one kick sample from Splice in Cubase after auditioning in the Splice player, and the sample played really differently in Cubase as opposed to in Splice. In Splice it was more rigid and bassy. I've tried downloading the sample to my system and then did drag and drop to find out if that was making a difference. Then I tried the same sample in another program, and it sounded the same as that of Splice. I had many other experiences where sample will have another tone in Cubase, particularly with kick and bass tones. Is this something to do with sample rate? I'm working in 48K for each project. In that case, even also the Logic Pro also should sound different. Are there any settings that need to be corrected in Cubase? I'm planning to upgrade to M2 Mac, and I actually had to upgrade my studio to Cubase 13.2, but since I had this problem, I'm kind of confused. All right. And Vishnu was kind enough to send the particular samples over. So this was the original file that he had, and this was just kind of the playback, or what was exported out of Cubase. So, and we have them kind of both at the same. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of edit this beginning. So I'm just going to turn my snap on, and we'll truncate the beginning, and I will now just kind of come over here, and let's just kind of line these particular events up, make sure they have the same start position. Okay, and I'm going to copy both of these, and we'll put it on like every two beats. So let me just turn my snap on. Okay, so just truncate the samples just a little bit here. Oh, sorry. Turn my snap off. Okay, so now I will come and make a copy, and I'll just put my snap on here again. So let's just set it to beat instead. Sorry about that. All right, so now when we play it back, we play both samples back here. Okay, let me just snap these. Okay, so, and let me just check my pre-section here. All right, so Now we play back. Now I'm going to flip the phase on one of the channels here, and they completely cancel out. So there's no difference in the sound in Cubase between the original file and the file that you exported. What it could be if it's sounding different is, if you have Media Bay, I'm not sure if I don't work with this splice, but if you have Media Bay and you're auditioning samples, you may alter the volume by just having a different preview volume. So if you have your preview volume here, when you drag that in, that will do it. But as you can see, just taking the two different samples, that when you play them together, they cancel out. So there's no problem with that. All right, so question, when you select a MIDI track, is it possible to have its output track selected automatically? I'm a film composer, would like to export stems more easily. When I select MIDI events, the respective MIDI tracks get selected and their output tracks are also automatically selected. I could go to the export, multiple tab, click link, and all you need to export would be there. At the moment, I have to select one by one manually. So that's a problem. Consider if you want that flexibility to have the output selected, which is important, then use instrument tracks. But once you have a MIDI track, it's that connection isn't necessarily known to Cubase because the MIDI is being sent out. So consider using instrument tracks. All right, question. I often generate 2 harmony tracks for my vocals. Is there any way to 1. Adjust VariAudio for all 3 vocal tracks in the lower editing window together at the same time, so allowing editing just as you would for 3-note instrument chords. 2. To copy the VariAudio notes. So we'll take a look at that first. So we'll come over, take a look at some VariAudio. So if we want to select our multiple events, and we will now just come over here. All right, so we will. All right, let me just. All right, so you can't necessarily, and also it says copy VariAudio notes of any one part once you get the desired harmony, and then paste them into later verses. So realize that a lot of times when you paste, so when you're dealing with multiple events, each file, so if we're looking at our multiple events here, we could see each of these files. Now you're going to edit them independently because they are on separate tracks. They're not on the same track. So as soon as you go to edit, one particular VariAudio section, that will make it kind of the active voice, and then you could do that. But you can't necessarily edit 2 parts because they're not within the same particular event. If you make your edits here and copy the events on the project window, those changes would automatically, those VariAudio, if I've done these edits here and I copy it later in the project, those would automatically be carried over. But a lot of times, people want, they are 3 separate tracks. They're not on the same track, so it doesn't work the same way as MIDI. All right. So we had a question. I've encountered problems in Windows 12 and 13 executing render in place with drum tracks, which are in a folder, which I've edited with the group editing and phase coherent editing modes. After rendering, everything seemed to be fine optically, but when listening to the single tracks, I found that the content in some events do not match the corresponding track. Example, snare track. After rendering both track and event, the track were named snare, but the event actually carried content of a tom. This mistake was only on some tracks, but not on all. So, one thing I would do is, so let's take a look and say if we have like our drum parts here, and so we'll just listen to this, say like an awful drum beat here. I'm going to, on the group track, I'm going to come over here. We'll just do some I will choose to do some, just do some group editing. So let's say I want to take just these. I'm going to move this over, let's say a 64th note. And let me just switch this to use quantize so we can slide over those particular events. And when I go to render now, so I'm going to render those particular tracks. I'll go to edit, to render in place, and we'll choose as one event. And let me just not have these record enabled. Sorry about that. And now we could see that, those particular hits are all occurring kind of at the same time. So sometimes, a render in place could be affected by the output. So make sure that the output routing is all set as expected. But, the output routing can be very critical. All right, so we had a question about some of the image sound VST sound loops from the Steinberg website. When I install them, they show up under VST/media loops and samples. I also bought some loops from image sound website, and they do not show up there. Is there a way to add this non-Steinberg loops to the list? So generally when we go to like your loop content sets, not every loop set that you buy, if it doesn't have the correct metadata, won't show up in here. Third-party companies sell these. They're often sold on our marketplace, but these are done by third-party companies. But to do this, they also had to have like all the metadata for pitch, root key, all the tagging, all the names, the BPM. So if it's just a normal set of loops that doesn't comply to all of that metadata, then they're not going to show up here. So the company could obviously make it. So if they wanted it to show up, they could create the content to do that. Okay, another question. What about VST instruments that do not show the picture like Steinberg VST instruments? Can we manually add the picture? So anytime you go to add a plugin, so let's say you get a new third-party plugin, and we go to, and we don't see like the user interface. When we come over here to media, all you have to do is on the plugin itself, you see this little camera, and then this will add the VST plugin picture to the media rack. And another question, I have a little mini keyboard controller, Nectar Impact LX Mini. I do not have a script for MIDI remote. How do I get one? So there are users that have shared many MIDI remote scripts, but you could also contact the manufacturer. Steinberg generally doesn't make remote control scripts for every controller available. The companies that make the controllers often do that. So maybe you could contact Nectar and ask for their particular, if they have a script prepared. But if you go to the Steinberg forums, there is a list of people that have created different controller scripts that share them for others to use. So it says also, even if it is set up correctly and the transport controls work fine, the keyboard does not play my virtual instruments. So it could be when you go into your studio setup, if it's set up maybe like for like a Mackie control, or if you see it kind of listed here, you may have one MIDI port that does like transport and remote controls, and another MIDI port that's for the keys. So if you have it set up for your transport, make sure that you have it connected correctly here. Also make sure that you have the correct MIDI input port. So if you go to add an instrument track, we could now come over, and as we add an instrument track, that you could see, like I have my Nectar set the input directly here. So if it doesn't show up on all MIDI inputs, if you hit the keys and you don't see it react right here in the lower right hand zone, then it's not communicating MIDI. But you could also just see if you can choose. So you can see that I have different control ports for my Nectar controller that I'm using. All right, last question. When I quit Cubase 12, I save and press X, it will close the program. But now when I do this in Cubase 13, the window's closed, but then the file selection project hub starts up and I have to go to the menu and press quit program. Not a big problem, but is there a way to make the closing with only one maneuver like before? So now that we're kind of doing a multi-window compliant, on Windows, you can't have like an orphaned window. So if all windows are closed, at that point you get the hub and you can quit Cubase from there. So it's just being compliant with kind of Windows standards. All right, with that, we will go ahead and migrate over to the Zoom. Let me jump back to our chat. And I will paste the Zoom link and I'll get the meeting started. And again, it's just a great way to meet people that are on the live streams. All right, so let me go ahead and get the Zoom started here. All right, so we have music all day on. All right, so some people joining. We see David Glick on. Kevin Mehmed, Bruce, Jan. Let's see David M, Brian Sawyer, John Barry. All right, great to see you, Jan. We got Peter, Chris Hall. Turn my camera on here. All right. Okay. It could be maybe someone has their audio on. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes. All right, I'll go ahead and post the link one more time in the chat. All right, we have Uno Memento. Thomas Van Dyke. Agi joining. All right, we'll give it our minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. All right,